Ask a 5-year-old what they want to be when they grow up, and they'll answer instantly. A firefighter, a doctor, an astronaut. Ask a grown adult the same question, and something strange happens. They hesitate. Then they tell you where they want to live, what car they'd like to drive, how much money they'd like to have in the bank by 50. Nobody actually answers the question anymore, and almost nobody notices that they've quietly swapped it for a different one. Here's the strange part. Why does a 5-year-old answer instantly and a 40-year-old stalls? It's not that adults have forgotten how to dream. If anything, they dream in more detail than any child could. The house, the title, the relationship, the exact number in the account. So the imagination is clearly still working. Something else has gone quiet. Not the ability to want things. Something underneath that. Try it on yourself for a second. If someone stopped you right now and asked what you want, your mind would probably start listing things you want to have, or things you want to do. A house, a trip, a promotion, a better version of the life you're already living. Now, notice what's conspicuously missing from that list. Not one of those answers describes what kind of person you'd be while having them, or after having them, once the novelty wears off. You can be an engineer today and a carpenter tomorrow. You can go from employed to unemployed, married to divorced, comfortable to broke. And through all of it, something in you doesn't stop existing. So what exactly is that thing? And why does nobody seem to be building it on purpose? Here's the answer, and it's simpler than it sounds. There were always two different questions hiding inside what do you want to be. One is about doing, your occupation, your possessions, your resume. The other is about being, the actual person underneath all of that, the one who doesn't change when the job title does. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, most of us quietly stopped asking the second question. We kept the first one and forgot the switch ever happened. But something doesn't fit. If being is the part of us that actually persists, the part that survives every career change, every relocation, every reinvention, why does almost nobody treat it as something to build? Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, Stoic, used to ask himself something close to this every single night. If I died tomorrow, who would I see in the mirror tonight? Not what would I have accomplished, who would I have become? So let's ask it seriously, together, for the next 20 minutes. Do we actually want to be something? Or have we simply never considered that being was ever ours to build? Rome, winter of 1486. A 23-year-old nobleman named Pico della Mirandola arrives in the city carrying something close to arrogance and something close to genius, and it's genuinely hard to tell which one is driving him. He has studied in Bologna, Ferrara, Padua, Paris, theology, philosophy, Hebrew, Arabic, Kabbalah, and he has decided, at an age when most young noblemen were still worrying about inheritances and marriages, to challenge every scholar in Europe to a public debate. Not on one subject, on 900. He drafts 900 theses, a staggering synthesis of Christian theology, Greek philosophy, Islamic thought, and Jewish mysticism, and sends out an open invitation across Europe. Come to Rome, argue against me, and I will personally pay your travel expenses. It's an audacious thing to propose. Even more audacious for a layman barely out of his 20s, in a church that did not take kindly to young men mixing pagan philosophy with sacred doctrine. He writes an introduction meant to be the opening speech of the debate, a warm-up, really, before the real fireworks were supposed to begin. He never gets the chance to deliver it. Before the debate can happen, a papal commission examines his theses and condemns 13 of them as heretical. Pico flees Rome. He's briefly imprisoned in France. The 900 theses vanish into controversy, and the grand debate never takes place. But the introduction survives. And centuries later, historians would come to regard that short, unspoken opening address as one of the defining documents of the entire Renaissance, the Oration on the Dignity of Man. Here's the strange part. The piece written to be the least important part of the event outlived everything else Pico ever wrote. In it, he imagines a scene: God at the very end of creation, surveying a universe already complete. The stars are fixed in their eternal orbits. The angels already know exactly what they are, forever. The animals already have their forms. A wolf will always be a wolf. A dove will always be a dove, sealed at birth. And God realizes there's nothing left in the storeroom to assign to the last creature he's about to make: man. So in Pico's telling, God says something almost startling. Paraphrased from the Latin: I have given you no fixed place, no form that is entirely your own, no function peculiar to you alone, so that you may have and possess, according to your own desire and judgment, whatever place, whatever form, whatever functions you yourself shall choose. Every other being in the universe was handed a finished nature at the moment of creation. Man alone was handed raw material and a set of hands to shape it. Here's the part almost nobody expects. Pico never got to live out a single decade of what he'd just described. 8 years after writing those words, he was dead at 31. Poisoned, historians now largely agree, likely by his own secretary, possibly on the orders of a powerful patron he'd fallen out of favor with. The man who believed a human being could spend a lifetime becoming themselves never got the lifetime. But here's where it gets strange, and where the actual argument begins. If we were handed that kind of freedom, why does almost nobody live like it's true? Pico's word for our condition was extraordinary for its era. He called man a chameleon. Not because we're fickle, but because we're the only creature in existence capable of choosing what we become, rather than simply being what we were made. Let's start at the bottom of that ladder. Stone. A stone, Pico says, is defined by inertia. It doesn't move, it resists, it stays exactly where it lands. And you can, if you want, live like a stone. Total passivity, dressed up as peace. Some people build an entire existence around doing as little as possible and call it contentment. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If that life is genuinely available to you, free of charge, no obstacles in the way, why does it usually feel so hollow instead of restful? Plant. A plant is defined by one function: pulling energy out of the world to survive. It doesn't create, it accumulates. And you can live like that too. Picture someone, anyone really, you've probably met a version of them, who tracks their own worth in a running total. Not a villain, just someone who checked a number once, felt a small hit of relief, and never stopped checking. A bigger apartment gets them 18 months of satisfaction before it becomes the new baseline. A raise gets absorbed by a slightly nicer version of the same life within a year. They're not doing anything wrong, technically. They're just doing exactly what a plant does, reaching for more sunlight, with no internal switch that says enough. But here's the problem hiding underneath that. If the goal has no finish line by design, what exactly is the plan for the day the reaching stops working? Animal. An animal is defined by two instincts: survival and reproduction. And a great deal of human ambition, once you strip away the branding, doesn't rise much higher than that. Comfort and pleasure, pursued with better tools and nicer packaging. None of this is Pico moralizing from a pulpit. His point is sharper and stranger than simple judgment. All three of these are genuinely available to you. Nothing in the universe prevents you from living as a stone, a plant, or a well-dressed animal. That's exactly what makes the human condition so unsettling. We're the only beings in existence capable of choosing to live beneath ourselves. So, quietly, to yourself, no one else needs to hear the answer. Which one of these three have you been feeding this year? Would you actually be willing to say it out loud to someone who knows you well? Here's the unexpected part. Pico doesn't treat the next rung as an upgrade on the first three. He treats it as a completely different category of existence, one that doesn't obey the same rules of appetite and accumulation at all. Now here's the turn. What if the ceiling isn't actually where we assumed it was? Use reason alone, Pico says, and you become a more sophisticated animal. Appetite equipped with better tools, cleverness in service of the same old instincts. But use intellect in its fuller sense, judgment, meaning, direction, and you begin rising toward what older traditions called the angelic, a life organized around contribution, virtue, coherence between what you believe and what you actually do. And if even that fails to satisfy you, Pico insists you can keep climbing until, his words, not a modern motivational posters, you become one spirit with God. Here's the sentence that should genuinely stop you, sitting inside a 500-year-old speech that was never even delivered out loud. Only to man is it given to be whatever he wills to be. Every other creature was handed a finished sentence. We were handed a blank page and told the rest was ours to write. Sit with that for a moment before we move on. Not as a slogan, as an accusation, gently aimed at whatever rung of that ladder you've quietly parked yourself on without ever deciding to. Picture a flower vase sitting on a three-legged table. Now imagine cutting off one leg. The table wobbles violently, and if it's lucky, it leans against a nearby wall and holds, barely, unsteadily. Cut a second leg, and there's no saving it. Vase and table go down together, and the vase shatters on the floor. Now imagine something different. Before any of that happens, you drill a hook into the ceiling directly above the table, run a small chain down to the vase, adjusted just tight enough that the vase barely grazes the tabletop below it. Its real support was never the table, it's above. Now cut a leg. Nothing happens to the vase. Cut a second. Still nothing. Cut all three. The table collapses completely, and the vase simply hangs there in midair, entirely undisturbed, because it was never actually resting on the table to begin with. It only ever brushed against it. Most of us build our entire sense of self on three legs: a career, a relationship, a financial situation. And life, sooner or later, tests all three: a divorce, a layoff, a diagnosis. And when enough legs get cut at once, as they sometimes do, all in the same brutal year, most people go down with the table. But history has recorded people who lost every leg simultaneously: career, money, health, reputation, all at once, often publicly, often catastrophically, and remained standing, upright, unshaken. Their point of support was never on the table in the first place. It was above it. They had already chosen to be something that no external circumstance had the power to amputate. But there's a problem with everything we've just said, and it's a big one, because it's happening to an entire generation right now, not just to isolated people in isolated crises. We are, by most available measures, one of the more anxious and depressed generations on record, sitting on more material comfort, more information, and more raw possibility than almost any generation in human history. That contradiction should bother us far more than it usually does. One woman, describing a depressive episode she'd lived through, said that she'd wake up, stare at the ceiling, and try to find one or two good reasons to get out of bed and start the day over again. She couldn't find them. Not because her life lacked achievements, a career, a home, relationships, because it lacked a self still under construction, something worth becoming that no circumstance could take from her. Motivation, it turns out, rarely comes from what you already have. It comes from what you're actively building. And if you've never once been seriously asked what kind of human being you're trying to become, there is nothing pulling you upward the moment circumstances start pulling you down. You're a vase resting entirely on a table, waiting for someone, somewhere, eventually, to cut a leg. So ask yourself honestly, right now, today, is your point of support on the table or above it? And how would you actually know the difference before the leg gets cut? Picture a man who spent 32 years climbing to the top of a company. The title on his door meant something in every room he walked into. Then retirement came, the way it always eventually does. and within it came something nobody had warned him about. Not boredom, something closer to disappearance. He'd introduce himself at dinners and hear his own voice trail off after the job title, because there was nothing behind it to finish the sentence with. He had spent 3 decades building an occupation, brick by brick, and never once building the person who would still be standing after the occupation was gone. Here's the thought that reorganizes everything that came before it. The reason so many of us feel unmoored isn't that we failed to achieve enough. It's that we've spent our entire lives excelling in the one domain that was never going to save us, the domain of doing, while leaving almost entirely unattended the one domain where we actually have near unlimited freedom, the domain of being. He hadn't lost his job. He'd lost the only self he'd ever bothered to build. Notice something Pico would want you to sit with. In the field of doing, you are surrounded by limits. You don't choose the body you inherit, the era you're born into, or every circumstance that shapes your life. Some things remain outside your control, no matter how fiercely you desire them. There are moral limits. You can take what isn't yours, technically, but the price is your own identity, not merely a legal penalty. There are emotional limits. You cannot manufacture, by tomorrow morning, the kind of forgiveness it took one grieving mother decades of quiet, deliberate inner work to reach after unimaginable loss. But in the field of being, Pico's answer is almost reckless in its generosity. You can become anything. Not because sheer willpower erases every constraint on Earth, but because character, integrity, courage, patience, compassion, wisdom was never rationed the way talent and circumstance are rationed. Nothing external is stopping you from becoming a person of complete integrity, except your own decision not to build one, day by day, choice by choice. Someone will object here, and it's worth taking seriously. Isn't this just motivational language borrowing old philosophy, telling people they can be anything when biology, trauma, and circumstance clearly shape what's actually possible for a given life? That's a fair challenge, not a naive one. Pico isn't claiming you can outwill your neurology or erase your personal history through sheer determination. His claim is narrower and, honestly, more demanding. Within the specific domain of character, honesty, courage, patience, compassion, the ceiling isn't fixed the way it is for raw talent or inherited circumstance. That's not a denial of real limits. It's a precise claim about exactly where the real limits actually sit. So how does someone actually build being, rather than simply admire the idea of it from a comfortable distance? The Stoic philosopher Epictetus offered a method centuries before Pico ever put pen to paper. The seeds of greatness inside us need an image to grow toward. If you want to become someone of integrity, hold the image of someone with integrity in front of you, deliberately, constantly, until it stops feeling like an image and starts feeling like a mirror. There's a simple version of this you can start tonight. Think of someone, real, historical, or someone from your own life, who genuinely embodies the kind of person you'd want to become. Not their achievements, their character specifically. The next time you face a decision, an argument worth losing gracefully, a temptation to cut a corner nobody would notice, a moment where impatience would be so much easier than restraint, ask what that person would do in your exact position. Most of the time, you'll already know the answer before you finished asking the question. Then do it anyway, even before you feel like that person yet. Acting consistently with who you want to become is, in practice, the only mechanism by which you slowly become it. There's a second, quieter version of the same discipline. Choose one specific behavior and practice it every single day for a defined stretch of time. A season, not a lifetime commitment made in a single burst of enthusiasm. Patience in traffic, deliberately, even when it costs you nothing to be irritated instead. A genuine good morning, said while actually looking someone in the eye and meaning it. Compassion towards someone who is visibly having a difficult day, at work, or at home, when indifference would be so much less effort. There's a claim from behavioral research worth testing on yourself directly. A response repeated daily for roughly 4 months tends to stop being an act of will and start becoming automatic, a habit, indistinguishable from instinct. Not because you felt naturally generous on day one, but because you had already chosen the person you were building, and you kept showing up as that person until the performance became the personality. And there's a nightly checkpoint that costs you nothing and asks for everything. Before you sleep, ask one question. Seriously, out loud if it helps. What did today teach me about the person I'm trying to become? Not what did I accomplish, not what did I acquire. What did I learn about being? If you genuinely can't answer, you probably weren't paying attention, because every single day, without exception, offers something. The absence of an answer is rarely the day's fault. It's usually a question of attention. Pico ended his oration, the speech he never got to deliver out loud, with a line that reads less like an argument and more like genuine astonishment. Who would not admire this chameleon of ours? He meant it as wonder, not as criticism. Every other creature in existence was finished the moment it was born. The wolf will always be a wolf. The dove will always be a dove. Only we arrive unfinished, carrying every possible seed inside us, with no guarantee of what will actually grow, and no one else assigned to tend the garden. And remember, Pico himself never got the decades it would have taken to finish becoming everything he described. 31 years, then gone. But the words survived him by more than 500 years, still doing exactly what he said being could do, outlasting every circumstance that tried to cut it down. Maybe that's the quieter proof underneath the whole argument. What you build in the domain of being doesn't need your whole lifetime to matter. It just needs to be real while it lasts. Go back for a second to that 5-year-old from the very beginning, the one who answered instantly. Firefighter, doctor, astronaut. No hesitation, because nobody had taught them yet to separate what they'd do from who they'd be. At 5, the two questions were still the same question. Somewhere along the way, yours split apart. And if you're honest, the next time someone asks who you are, you'll probably still answer with a resume, a job, a role, a list of things you've done, instead of an identity. That's not a character flaw. It's just the habit of a lifetime, quietly finishing the sentence for you before you've had the chance to. Next time someone asks what you want to be when all of this is finally over, not what you want to do, not what you want to have, but what you want to actually be, pay attention to whether you have a real answer, or whether you've spent your whole life quietly avoiding the question. Because that question was never just for children. It was the only question that was ever really yours to answer.